Shalom uvracha. It's Thursday morning, the week of Parshat Korah. I hope everyone is well. Again, we have in mind, we're davening for all those who are not well, and we wish a refuah shlema. And of course, this week is our first week outside in a limited capacity. Some people are going to be davening in the parking lot of the shul. And again, we all recognize that it is just a very small step. We will not really be back until everybody is back. Children, adults, families, singles, everyone together in the shul where we can have it once again, as we say, Berov Am Hadrat Melech, in the fullness of the totality of the community. But it is a small step, and we hope that it is successful. I just wanted also to mention, of course, last week we completed the Shiva of Rabbi Norman Lamb, Dr. Lamb, Zichrono Livracha, one of the great leaders of our generation and one of the great thinkers and probably the greatest darshan of the second half of the 20th century. And I thought it would be appropriate this week to share some ideas from some of the sermons of Rabbi Lamb related to this parsha as I was looking in his Torah. And that's one of the ways that we remember someone. We don't build monuments. We don't build edifices to them, but rather what we call the edifice complex of some people, but rather that we say their Torah, we communicate their values. The Gemara in Baba Kama says that with the death of Chizkiyahu, Hoshivu Yeshiva al Kivro, they set up a yeshiva next to his kever, next to his gravesite, which symbolically means they passed on his message, his Torah, his values, his ideas. And Rabbi Lamb, as many of you know, came from a Hasidic stock, in his background, and he tried to integrate some of those ideas into his teaching, into his sermons, into his shiurim. And so Rabbi Lamb noted that within the Kabbalistic tradition that is cited by many of the Hasidic masters, in this week's Parsha, Korah is presented in an interesting way. The Torah tells us at the very beginning, Vayikach Korah, and Korah took. And yet the Torah then doesn't tell us what exactly did he take. On a pshat level, of course, the word Vayikach in that sentence just means that he started to gather people together. But in terms of strict Hebrew, we would expect that it would explain something. And the Kabbalistic tradition noticed that, and it connected Korah to another figure in Jewish history who's a little bit vague, and there's a certain ambiguity with him, who also turns out to be a villain, and that, of course, is Cain. Cain also was a family member who had envy and jealousy of his brother, of his relative, and ended up doing something terrible. And there, too, Rabbi Lamb noted that the Torah presents, it says that Vayhi Cain basadeh vayomer, he was in the field with his brother, and he said something. But the Bible is then silent. Just like with the Vayikach, the Bible is silent. And it doesn't tell us, what did Cain say to Hevel? And the simple message that Rabbi Lamb conveyed is that it's not important what he said or what he took, because it was a smokescreen. Korach may have hid behind all kinds of wonderful slogans, but his real ambition was power. It was a power grab. He wasn't concerned with democracy, with highfalutin values. He really just wanted the kahuna himself. He wanted to knock Aaron off. And the same thing with Cain. Whatever he said to Hevel to seduce him to go into the field, to encourage him to talk to him, was just a way of drawing Hevel in and letting his guard down, and then, unfortunately, engaging in homicide. And Rabbi Lamb, in a different sermon, continued and developed, and these are the beautiful books, Drashot Ledorot, which are very worthwhile, which is a collection of some of the sermons. The sermons are also online. But Rabbi Lamb develops an idea that he comes back to in a number of places, based upon the work of Erich Fromm, the great writer and psychotherapist. And he writes about the fact that there are two types of personalities, the rebel and the revolutionary. And the rebel represents the person who, in Fromm's categories, is someone who is anti-authority, who wants anarchy, and he doesn't really have deep ideological convictions in this dichotomy. The rebel is the one who wants to destroy the existing frameworks. The rebel is the one who is driven by all kinds of considerations. Some of them may not necessarily be so pure and holy. But the revolutionary is completely different. This person is not necessarily one who participates in revolutions. We're using the term psychologically. The revolutionary is the one who thinks independently. The revolutionary will even be able to see through common sense when that term is used to describe what is but nonsense, repeated often enough by those who are influential enough. The revolutionary is one who can transcend the parochial limits of his own society milieu and criticize both his own and any other society. The revolutionary can sometimes be right and wrong, good and evil, constructive or destructive, depending on what he says no to. And Rabbi Lamb develops this idea that Korach and Datan and Aviram were people who, again, especially through the rabbinic and Hasidic lens, are people who are opportunistic, people who are political, demagogues, who played on people's emotions, fears, sloganeering, and ultimately, but they were ultimately just rebels. They were mordim, without a deep moral core. And unfortunately, we are sometimes confronted with people like that. Sometimes we ourselves have to be careful that we don't fall into that trap as well. And Rabbi Lamb cites a beautiful vort, a beautiful idea from the first Chabad Rebbe, Rav Shneir Zalman. Rav Shneir Zalman, in a Hasidic twist on the beautiful verse that Jeremiah says, Zacharti la chesed ne'urayich, ahavat klulotayich, lechteich acharai b'midbar be'eretz lo zurah, that you followed, that the Jewish people followed God into the desert, into a land that was not planted, that you had faith in God and trust in God. So the Chabadsker Rebbe plays on the word be'eretz lo zurah, a land that was not sown. And he translates it, not only a land not sown, but also a land in which the word and idea and imperative lo was sown. Be'eretz lo, a place where you could say no, and it was planted. The willingness to go against the stream, not to simply be swept up by the currents of what is fashionable, what is popular, but rather to be able to say no, to be countercultural, to be the revolutionary in that way, to be able to be countercultural, to be ourselves, to forge our own souls and characters. There we learned in the desert to say no to idols, worshipped by crowds, no to the passions and lusts that tyrannize a human being, and no to the advice which inheres in his character. A person is able to say no. A person is able to cut through the thickets. A person is able to recognize what is sincere, what is just, what is right, and not simply be swept along. And we have to be, each of us has a little Korach in us, each of us has a little Kain in us, and we have to confront that. We have doubts, we have challenges, which is all fine, but we have to be careful that when we get swept up, that we don't become opportunistic, that we don't become so political and so demagogic, that we don't see the other person's point of view, that we don't recognize the humanity of the other. that we don't simply make slogans to defend our point of view for personal reasons, but that we sincerely have ideological convictions, that we have the courage of our convictions, sometimes to say no against a majority culture, and really ensure that we are on the side of Moshe and not the side of Korach, on the side of Hevel and not the side of Cain. I want to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom, a peaceful Shabbat, a pleasant Shabbat, and once again, everyone should stay safe and healthy. Again, I urge everyone to vote in the primaries if you haven't voted yet. Number two, to make sure you fill out the census. And everyone should please make sure to keep social distancing and masks in public where it's appropriate, where there are people around, in order to make sure that we continue to have the good numbers going down that we have here in New Jersey and New York and Connecticut area. And we should hear from good days for our entire country and our entire world. Amen. Kain Hiratza.